I draw your attention to the housekeeping notices which are now being shown on the screen. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Doug Veal. I'm the chairman for this afternoon's session. One or two more housekeeping notes before we... but let me first of all welcome you here to the Geological Society for this latest version of the Strix lecture. And may I say how gratifying it is to see so many of you here to pay tribute to a man, Tony Kent, who probably a lot of you didn't know or don't remember. It was my privilege to work with him for a number of years, which is why I get to chair the Strix committee. One or two more housekeeping notes, just to emphasise, in the event of fire, those seated towards the back of the lecture theatre can exit through any of the doors out there and make your way round into the courtyard of Burlington House. Those of you seated towards the front of the theatre, follow me through this door here. If any of you have not got a programme, they are still available from the desk outside, and it looks like that, and the programme information is on the back. If any of you are interested in using Wi-Fi, you use the Geological Society public Wi-Fi connection, and the password is sediment. And the hashtag is UKEIG Strix, all one word, and I'm told that the case doesn't matter, it can be upper or lower case. So if any of you are interested in that, you can follow that. I think the one other important thing is that the Strix lecture itself, which will be after the tea and coffee break, is being live streamed. And so it is very important that we are here, back, sat down, ready to begin by 3:45. Yeah, I could do, yeah. Okay. After the first lecture and the questions and discussion, we will also have another item on the agenda, which is the announcement and presentation of the 2018 Strix Award. I think that is all I have to say. And so you're not here to see me, to hear me. Oh, I know, one other thing. This award is in memory of Tony Kent. I'm not going to do my usual spiel about Tony, except to remind you, or tell you, those of you who don't know, that he was an ornithologist, interested in birds, an interest that he retained all his life. And when he started to work in information retrieval, he retained that interest and gave his retrieval packages ornithological names, in particular Strix, which is the Latin name of the tawny owl. So when we set up the award in his memory, we adopted the Strix as the symbol of the award. And as usual, I have brought the owl along to keep an eye on proceedings, and here she is. I say she, I'm not really sure. Owl sexing is definitely not my speciality. So, with no further ado, it's my pleasure now to invite Stella Dextre Clarke, who won the Strix Award in 2006, to deliver some reflections on then and now, contrasts in the scope of information retrieval. Stella.
Hello. Like Doug, lovely to see so many of you here coming to honour the memory of Tony Kent. My role in starting things off is to provide a little background and context on thinking especially of those who are perhaps too young or have not had the opportunity to meet Tony Kent and maybe wonder what all the fuss is about. And also for the older ones amongst us, perhaps just stir a few fond memories of those pioneering and exciting old days. But I can't just drool all afternoon, and therefore I have another objective as well. I want to pick up a point. I wrote an article recently. It was commissioned, a sort of encyclopedic article about the thesaurus. Not any old thesaurus, but the information retrieval thesaurus. And since it was an encyclopedic article, I dwelt a bit on the history when thesauri were used mostly with cards in a sort of they were brought in before the days of computers, really. And so one of the referees picked up on this and said, you shouldn't be calling this information retrieval. And here is words. Research in IR has migrated to computer science. The term changes meaning. It's all about search engines nowadays. Well, that's not the way I had been using the term. I use it quite broadly to talk about information retrieval. But I thought, well, maybe the guy's right. Let us explore a little bit what we mean by information retrieval. So I looked for a definition, and where else but Wikipedia to find a definition? There you have it.
Could you keep facing the microphones all the time?
Oh, yes, because of the live streaming, which has already started. The activity of obtaining information system resources relevant to an information need from a collection of information resources. And there's a rider on it as well. You may not be able to read it all that well on the screen, but if I bring it up now, This explains that it is actually quite a broad definition. This is some of the areas where it can be applied. Now, nowhere does it say this is about computer science or this is about search engines, but it's pretty plain that to do most of that stuff, you would expect to be using a computer. Anyway, that's October 2018. Let's go back to what we meant in those days. So I tried to go back and find a definition. So far as I can make out, Calvin Moore's invented the term, thought of the term, and this is the earliest definition I've been able to find from 1951. Process or method whereby a user is able to convert his need for information into an actual list of citations to documents in storage containing information useful to him. And he too adds a rider or an explication of where it applies. And again, it's actually quite broad. Intellectual aspects of the description of information and specification of a search. Whatever systems, techniques, or machines may be used. But an interesting feature of this, which I've highlighted there, is the expectation that there are documents. And the feeling that you'll be happy when you got citations to the documents. You haven't actually got the information yet, but the citation is what you were expecting to get. Also, that the documents are stored somewhere. That seems to have been part of his thinking. Here's another one. This is a classification research group in 1955. And they thought that information retrieval was their thing. Faceted classification, the basis of all methods of information retrieval. And you'll still hear that slogan quoted today. But they too saw that it was broad. They don't mention documents specifically, but they do say published information. And they do expect it to relate to a certain field of knowledge. So, quite broad. I'm moving on now to 1967, which is convenient for a number of reasons. One, I've got some references easily to hand that date back to then. But secondly, that is approximately the time that Tony Kent was appointed to his position heading the unit of UCSIS, the UK Chemical Information Society, where he was to explore the use of the computer in information retrieval. So at that time, here's John Sharp writing that it covers all the techniques, conventional, non-conventional, used to provide for recovery from a store of documents. Still on about storage, and there are still documents of those items, and they're relevant to a stated information need. And let me point out what I think people were assuming in those days. There was all this talk of documents, but there was an understanding that what you were looking for was not actually the documents. What you were looking for was the concepts that were in those documents. And you could call those concepts ideas or subjects, or there's lots of ways. But what we're trying to get at is stuff that you will find in there somewhere. And there's a recognition that concept is not the same as words. You see the words in the document, but you're after something that is behind those words. However, if you use a computer, words is what the computer has to go on. At least that's what people were thinking then. They weren't thinking too much about images and so on. And therefore, it follows as the night the day, you've got to have classification because a computer can't think, can it? And so no wonder the classification research group thought that information retrieval was theirs. There was thought of computerized IR in 1967, or Tony Kent wouldn't have been asked to get on with it, but plenty of others just dismissed this idea as pretty much unthinkable. That said, he was not the first. If you look back to Vannevar Bush, who wrote a very influential piece called As We Think Now in 1945, he didn't have a computer available, but he hypothesized a machine called the Memex, which was based around microfilm that would store all the information, loads of it, there at your fingertips. And he had a sort of a preview of hyperlinkage between items in this machine. Or you could look back to Paul Ottley, who actually built something called the Mundanium or the Mundanium, which was an attempt to assemble all the world's knowledge on cards and so on. And he too had some linkage between items in there. Also in 1967, the computer wasn't a totally unknown thing. They had been invented. In theory, they were around. But the problem with these computers was a computer to do even the tiniest bit of calculation was so big it would fill a room. And it was so expensive that it was going to be beyond the reach of anybody. So, well, loads of people, most people just sort of dismissed the computer. That was the sort of thing that Tony Kent was up against. If I tried to summarize what there was around in 1967, there was microfilm and microfiche, which was thought quite promising in those days. I didn't like it, but others did. And when I say 1967, I didn't like it. In 1967, I hadn't even started. I began to study information science in 1970, so I'm speaking slightly before my time. However, by the 1970s, there were all these card systems. Card systems were great fun. All this variety of made-notch cards, feature cards, item cards, aperture cards, 80-column cards, loads of cards. This was the cutting edge of information retrieval, and it was great fun, but I mustn't spend more time entertaining you with anecdotes about cards. There were also quick indexes, keyword in context, and that was quite a promising thing where computers were being used to do something useful with words, admittedly, but that was a feasible thing from about 1961. Keyword QUOC, that was keyword out of context, and SLIC, that was selective listing in combination. And then there were these SDI services, selective dissemination of information, and that was quite a promising thing that was being developed by some of the professional societies, such as the American Chemical Society and the National Library of Medicine. Also, there was quite a bit of research into the use of computers for analysis, classification, indexing, etc. But successes in these days were mostly things to do with sorting that machines could do. And there was very little attempt to address the intellectual side because of this kind of assumption that a computer couldn't do it. Here are some verdicts from those times. There's Jack Mills. He was a classificationist, absolutely a classificationist. But he did seriously research, and he did research that tried to sort of simulate this is the sort of way that a computer would handle it. But this was his conclusion, that the manual systems are every bit as effective and very much cheaper. And likewise, John Sharp in 1967, costing's just a waste of time. Firstly, the things aren't effective, and secondly, it just is too expensive. Wilfred Ashworth, same time, points out that SDI is a serious possibility for mechanization. So really what I'm trying to bring out, that for someone like Tony Kent, who he was an entomologist, not an entomologist, an ornithologist, sorry, a zoologist at any rate, leaping into computers, he obviously loved the things. It took a great leap of faith, and for people to back him also, it really did not look like a very an easy win to go into that area. He was a pioneer. And here are two quotes. For these quotes, I've lifted them from this little book. I've got a feeling that they're available to purchase outside. Is that right? Certainly that there is an inquiry at the desk.
They're available online. If you go to the UKEIG website, you can find find out how to get hold of them.
Yeah, a little anthology, a background to the Tony Kent Strix Award. And from there, I found a couple made by Jan Willie, who's not with us here today, I don't think. Even Tony Kent in 1991 said, "I refuse to believe that knowledge can be inferred from any conceivable software system." So he was very conscious of the limitations of what was involved. And here's another quote from the same source, slightly earlier. Computer technology can only at best provide gadgets that reduce drudgery. So there's where we were in those times, but let's see, have things moved on at all since then? And to examine that, I thought it would be rather nice to look back at the past winners of the Tony Kent Strix Award to see what did they get the award for, and can we see there any sort of trends or, you know, what's it all about? My problem was it's really hard to summarize, really hard to present a picture to you on one screen so you can see what is happening with the award. So the most I've been able to fit onto a screen and say something meaningful about them is, as you can see on this one, 1998. This is the first year of the award. Stephen Robertson, best known for his work on statistics, probabilistic methods of IR, the BM25 ranking algorithm. He's done lots more besides. I'm sorry he's not here today. But you know, even some of that probabilistic work, even though he was doing that work while Tony Kent was around, I don't think Tony Kent was quite into the potential of statistics, which are now more than ever are relied on by all the search engines. Then Donna Harmon, leadership of Trek. I think it's the personal qualities that were being honoured there. The pursuit of this, the text retrieval conference, I should spell out Trek, yes, it's there. And then Martin Porter, the Porter stemming algorithm lives on today, I believe, still embedded in lots of software. He was a software man, though I'm not sure that he was a computer scientist. Peter Willett into chemoinformatics, and again, an emphasis on software. Next one, to the Malcolm Jones. Now, this guy was into musical, a database of and catalogue of musical performances. I joined a choir recently, a couple of years ago, and only since then do I realise how indebted every choir up and down the country is, so that we can all sing from the same hymn sheet. And if you are not singing from the same thing, it's chaos, I can tell you. So we're great. Doesn't sound like computer science, does it? But it's very valuable nonetheless. Here's Herbert van Sompel into the Open Archives Initiative, and Keith van Rijsbergen, I think he was hoping to be here today, theoretical modelling of IR systems. Jack Mills, I mentioned already, a classification man. And there's myself, and I can tell you what I was doing was not computer science. Mats Lindquist, digital library work, paralog information retrieval software. And Kalervo Järvelin, I don't know how you pronounce his name, but he was all over the place, NLP and loads more. I cannot do justice to the achievements of this man, and so many others, far greater than mine, I may say. But there we go. Carol Ann Peters, Clay, this is the multilingual environment. Very important work there. Michael Lynch, back to chemistry again, variety generation. It can be applied to things other than chemistry. Alan Smeaton, another all-rounder, NLP, that's natural language processing. But he was also into image retrieval and other stuff. Doug, in 2012, the prize was shared between two of them, and both of them were into software development. This is sort of search engine stuff. Bruce Croft, amazing. He seems to have spent his entire career doing one thing after another that would support information retrieval. Susan Dumais, who was the first one to give a lecture in this room. She was tremendously interested in human-computer interaction and responsible, one of the authors of latent semantic and indexing. Peter Ingwersen, again interested in the human side of things, very much concerned with the user as well as the theoretical understanding of information retrieval. And then Stella Agosti, she was again a great leader, a great community person who inspired people all over the place to do good work in information retrieval in sundry areas. Martin de Rica, who's definitely in the room, and I hope this is a fair reflection, computational methods for analyzing, understanding and enabling effective human interaction with information sources. We shall be hearing more about this later this afternoon. And here I'd like to give a general apology to all of those past winners if I have understated their achievement. They all did great things. As for this year's winner, I couldn't possibly say. Secret until a little bit later. Look, I tried to get it all onto one screen by reducing them to one-liners, but it is very hard to convey the scene accurately. If this gets translated later into text somewhere or some other format, we may be able to do a better picture of how the award has gone in the past. I'd like to move on a bit now, just to draw some of this together with contrasts in the scope of information retrieval between how it was then, sort of 1960s, 70s, and how it is now. So then, as I recall it, you were looking at limited size of what you could do. I mean, I vividly remember going into these libraries with chemical abstracts, and we thought it was a monster because it occupied shelf after shelf and stack after stack. It was immense, but it was still finite. You could envisage searching the thing from end to end. And that is pitifully small when you compare it with now the sort of terabytes of data that people are aiming to trying to search with IR techniques. The only size limit is in your imagination. Then there was very much an emphasis on the collection, very often, usually a library, but sometimes it was a bibliographic database. Now, I suppose you could say that a network was a virtual collection. You could perhaps stretch a point and say that what you can get over the internet is some kind of collection. But really, I think we've got away from the collection. And then when you look at non-text media, multilingual stuff, you can get it almost every language. Unstructured data is there in the intranet. We do information retrieval on our own PCs, mobile phones as well. The idea of a collection has become very loose indeed. If we look at the processes, then you had classification, indexing, sorting. There were citation indexes, it is true. And we had the theory of hyperlinks, if not the practice. But now we've got all of those. I think they're all still in use, very much so. But you've got so many more: ranking, stemming, filtering, LSI. I've mentioned some of these already among the past winners. But there are far too many processes to mention here. Then you just couldn't get at a computer. The ordinary mortal did not have access to a computer. And if it did, the value of the thing was disputed. And what was done was reliant on batch processes. I mean, if you say, well, the American Chemical Society, that was using computers, wasn't it? But my recollection of what they got into computers for in the first place was not really information retrieval. I think they were trying to make more efficient their production of the printed product. And information retrieval was a sort of byproduct of what they're doing. I'm seeing some nodding heads around this corner from some of my generation. So that must be right, mustn't it? Whereas now, computer use is the norm. We can't do anything without a computer. And it's mostly online, it's mostly interactive. And the things are everywhere. They're not just the computer per se, they're your mobile phone, there's a computer in your car engine, there's going to be a computer in your fridge next. It's mind-boggling where the things are getting to. And so potentially information retrieval can cross all of the divides across all of these media. It is remarkable. And then another important aspect is who was doing it. In those days, it was scientists, primarily scientists and engineers. After the Second World War, they were tremendously conscious of their need to get at information quickly. And so loads of the early work was done by the professional societies where those scientists and engineers belonged, not nearly so much in humanities or the business area, and librarians who were also involved with the professional societies and who were serving the scientists and engineers. But now, if I believe that critic of mine, is it just a matter for the IT department? I sort of don't think so. I think it's everyone's business. I think information retrieval, I think even the public, the layman, is becoming aware of it and the need for it, and can sometimes come up with new ideas for how to do it. So if I try to draw some conclusions out of all of this, I'd say the early definitions that I pulled up, they were not based around computer science. They were quite broad in their own way. And that you can still interpret the term broadly, with or without computers and search engines. But I'd say the scope for researching it and for applying it is immeasurably broader than in the times of Tony Kent. It is just amazing. And who knows where the Tony Kent Award will go next. So think a little bit about where next. If this statement, you may not agree with this statement. Resources from anywhere in the world are now easy to access in almost any language, or none in the case of images. It's not completely true. I mean, there are places still to be cracked. There is still grey literature and things in difficult languages and faraway places still waiting to be brought into the fold. But largely, we have cracked a lot of this one. It can still be a challenge to find the thing that you are looking for. And so I think there's still work to be done on sorting out, especially if you know, if it's a known item, you know it is there somewhere, but you cannot lay your hands on it. Still more could be done. And as for the Internet of Things, that will offer unlimited scope for finding more stuff. Can you imagine it? When you can interrogate your fridge from the office and, have I got enough eggs or should I buy some on the way home to make my favorite recipe? You can retrieve all sorts of information from there, potentially. And then if I look at where I would like information retrieval to go next, I look, while I was doing the research for this piece this afternoon, initially I took down some of the journals and books, there's loads of them around my little study, and I wrote down the quotations so that I would get them right, and I had them there on a slide. And then towards the end I thought, I ought to put up the references where I got those. And could I find them? They were up there somewhere, but could I lay my hands on my own stuff? I could find lots of stuff on my computer, and if I went to an index of a known place, I could find it. But could I put it all together? That sounds like a pretty unthinkable challenge, but unthinkable challenges have been cracked before. Maybe there is a future way of doing it. And if I move on still further, where I would really like to be able to find stuff, I used to know it once. It's up there somewhere. If only I could get into my own past recollections. And that strikes a chord with what the Alzheimer's Society people are doing, research into finding stuff or finding ways to track. Could there be some sort of confluence between dementia research and information retrieval? Maybe that's just a wild thought, but who knows where it is going. And here now are the promised references, just a few of them. And that really brings me to an end. I've gotten a little addendum for going back to the old definition of information retrieval and taking another look at it. But I don't want to go into there because probably I'm straying beyond my time limit. No?
Plenty of time.
I'll go on, shall I? Just a little bit more. There's the Wikipedia definition. Is it due for an update? In this slide, I've picked out, you can read it, things that I would query about it. I mean, the second sentence down below arguably doesn't need to be there at all. It's not really part of a definition. It's an explication of some of the areas where you might apply information retrieval. And if I look at the first sentence, information system resources, I'm not sure what that orange bit, the system resources, is doing there. Relevant to an information need. Has it got to be relevant to an information need? Because sometimes serendipity is a great thing. Sometimes it's nice to have help with finding stuff that you didn't know you needed. Yeah. Then this whole business of, does there have to be a collection? I'm not sure. It could be that in the information retrieval specialist group, you've got a definition and maybe it requires a collection or not. I don't know. You may have your own idea about it, but I think the idea of a collection is going a bit woolly at the edges. And well, information resources, I suppose that doesn't say much. It's just the collection of information resources. Those could be anything. I think that definition allows them to be anything, including objects. They could be gravestones. They could be all sorts of things. So if you look at that definition and think, okay, I'm left only with the activity of obtaining information. Is that enough? And I tried to play with it to see what could I come up with that was a better definition. And this is my weak effort, the activity of obtaining information or processing information in such a way that it can be found. Because remember that whole business of the collection, in the old way of thinking, back in the Tony Kent days, part of information retrieval was actually putting the collection together, going out and selecting the stuff that would be useful for a body of users. And so I would still include that in useful information retrieval research, processing the information, pre-processing it so that it could be found later. So that's where I got to. Some of you might be able to pick holes in that or think of something better. But really, I'm going to end now by saying, well, look, I'm interpreting the scope broadly, and I'm happy to keep on doing that, and you can do whatever you think best. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella. That gives us plenty of time for questions and discussions. So the floor is now yours. John.
Excuse me one second.
Please speak very close to the microphone so that it records.
So very close to the microphone.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's close enough. So thank you for a very nice talk, Stella, almost none of which I disagree with, which says it all, but almost none of which. But in his defence, since he's not here, I don't think, to speak for himself, I can't remember what Martin Porter's first degree was in, but I'm pretty sure he had a diploma in computing, whether that's computer science, I don't know, but a diploma in computing from Cambridge, and his PhD was submitted to the computer laboratory. So I think that probably counts as a computer scientist, don't you? Quite well qualified.
Thank you for that correction. The truth is, I don't know. And if anyone can speak up in defense of any of the other award winners, I would quite like to see a record made of what the past award winners did, and for that to become available perhaps on the UK site or somewhere else. So any more corrections will be welcome, and I hope to see that something gets done with them.
So it's probably not the thing to do for at any length here, but I'd be very happy to get involved with it. I know most of them, not all of them, but I know most of them, so I could contribute to that. It's a very interesting point. Yeah. Of course, they come from a wide variety of subjects, not least because of the time. I mean, I have a degree in what was called computing science then, not computer science, computing science, and it was considered very odd and new in the early 70s to have a degree in computing, a first degree in computing. So,
yes.
You know,
yes,
that's a matter of age.
Yeah, the pioneers couldn't possibly have had a qualification in computer science. What I found very difficult in putting that together was knowing what the award was given for. You could find out what the people did in their lifetime, but you couldn't always single out what they got the award for, and that is interesting. Both aspects are interesting.
So, yeah. Stella, there's something you mentioned on memory, which I found very interesting. I have a personal interest in memory and information retrieval, particularly with regard to poor short-term memory and people with dyslexia. I think there's a whole area to do with memory and information retrieval I think we know to know more about, and I'd like your reflections on it. Have you heard of a writer by the name of Nick Carr? He wrote a very interesting article called "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" And the premise behind it is that basically what you're doing is you're outsourcing. You don't remember anything. You're outsourcing your memory to Google, so you don't remember the information. You just remember you can go to Google and type a search string and get back the research results. So that you come, you know, it's almost making us lazy. What's your reflection on that issue?
I think that's an excellent point. And you know what you remind me of? You remind me of me with a cookery book, because there's a lot of recipes that I have made time and again. And yet, when it comes to making them again, I don't seem to remember. I seem to always get out the recipe and look at it. And even when I'm in the middle of it, I quite often go back and look in there and check that I'm doing it. And if I didn't have that book, I would remember them, because quite a lot of recipes that I learned, not from the book at all, but just by trying and doing, and I just sort of work it out as I go along. So I think some of us, possibly not all of us by any means, but it might be dependent on your own mental makeup, that if the prop is there, you have a tendency to go and use it, whereas there may be some other people who are determined to throw away the crutches and go and forge their own path. And I don't know how you would find your own way between how many people go on each way, or whether most of us are some sort of mix of that in some circumstances or others. But is Google making it stupid is a good question.
Thanks for your talk, fascinating. When you showed the table, I was wondering, you know, with all the accomplishments, what people think their own greatest accomplishment is versus what other people think they accomplished. It's not sometimes the same thing. So it would be interesting to record that too. But my real question is about serendipity. When you said serendipity, I was wondering, is it the case that we can no longer have serendipity when we solve search? Because it seems to me that only a suboptimal system leads to this distraction that has a beneficial outcome we call serendipity, right? So if I browse around in my personal library, if I Google around in hyperspace, then I get distracted and I have a lucky moment that this distraction gives me a thought. But if I go straight to the answer I was intending without that kind of zigzag, perhaps serendipity is dead. What do you think about that idea?
Well, I agree with you. I agree with you in principle that if you just go straight to the idea, then serendipity, then you're not doing serendipity. There are times when you do absolutely want to go straight to that idea, and it's essential to be able to do so because life is too short to be fiddling around looking at the rest of the stuff. But can't you have both things on different occasions? You can, some of the time, choose to go straight to the thing, or do your best to choose to go straight to the thing, and at other times do some browsing. I would say that the computer does allow you, and the internet does allow you quite a lot of serendipity. It's a different sort of serendipity from the old sort that you sometimes got in the library when you were surrounded with books which tended to be classified, and so the ones round about did tend to have some relationship to what you were first looking at. It's less restricted when you're surfing on the web. I think serendipity lives on and is welcomed by most people in some circumstances, though not others. I can't add any other useful thoughts on how to encourage it, but I'm sure it's still alive and wanted.
Thank you very much for your talk. I guess the definition thing was really interesting for me because I was always in the back of my mind a question like that. But my question would be, have you ever thought about in terms of not changing or revising the definition, but maybe the actual term of information retrieval? Because sometimes maybe information retrieval meant something else than it does now. Maybe we're not retrieving exactly information, we're retrieving inferences or meaning sometimes. So, and what about the individual words, information retrieval? Is that something we should, I mean, it's quite vague now, so should we look for a revised definition or for terms?
Well, that's an interesting thought. There could be sub-areas within the broad area of information retrieval that have specialized names. Also, I think there's probably a tendency for different communities to use information retrieval for different different areas that they think are their prime objective. I don't personally feel a need to look for that term's always been around to me, so I don't personally feel the need for another one. But what will happen is that when some new fashion comes in or some new insight, invades our way of life, then maybe naturally a new term will come along and displace it. I don't myself feel the need to go and look for one. But if you've got a better idea, why not strike out, write a blog about it, and it might become reality. Now, any more questions?
I'm just going to make a comment on that last one. In a minute, Alan. Just going to make a comment on that last one. It really begs the question, what is information? And there's a quote from T.S. Eliot, which I'm not sure if I can remember exactly, but it's, where is the knowledge lost in information and where is the information lost in data, or something like that, which I think is very pertinent.
Yeah, very
Sorry,
good.
one at the back.
Okay. You gave an example of, it was of how somebody could benefit from finding something that they didn't know that they needed. I can't quite remember what the context was, but that is, I think, was it's classically been definition of a good second-hand bookshop. You know, it has nothing to, and the whole point of that, of course, is it has nothing to do with computers. Is that it's stuff which is random, and it's that opportunity to explore which perhaps we may be losing. I don't know. Thought.
Yeah, well, I think that chimes with the question about serendipity. Your second-hand bookshop is the serendipitous stereotype from the past, and still with us, of course. And long may the second-hand bookshop live. I don't think we've lost it. Okay, there may be fewer of them than there were, but there are other ways of doing the same thing. Amazon offers opportunity for stumbling from one thing to another. They help you stumble from one thing to another because they really want you to discover something else. Though generally what you find is something that has some linkage with what you had before. But am I imagining it? My feeling is that when you just surf on the internet, you can very easily stray to somewhere that you were not expecting and find something that interests you, that you were unaware that you needed.
If it's been indexed and catalogued, yes. Sorry, if it's been indexed and catalogued, and that's always the problem, is that there is a wealth of material which has not yet been. I don't know when we will actually achieve that. It's like going to the British Library or something, and you start digging around in old books, and you find things that you can't find any other way.
I tell you somewhere else that you find things that you didn't know you wanted, and that's all these catalogues that keep dropping through your mailbox. I don't know about you, but I get loads of them, and I mean most of them just go straight into the rubbish, but just occasionally I pick one up. I mean, there's all sorts of people selling gadgets, and my husband is a great one for looking through and finding useful things in there that I had no idea that I needed, but then I find them in my Christmas stocking.
I think junk mail is a whole area which, and in fact, is very valuable and will be even more valuable after 30 or 40 years when we go back and revisit it. So I hope that people do keep their junk mail and catalogues.
Well, you're welcome to come to my place anytime and collect a big bundle. Any other questions?
I'll just make one more comment, that something that occurred to me when Stella was going through the past Strix winners, and one of them was Malcolm Jones, who worked in the area of music retrieval. And that brought to mind something that I think illustrates the enormous change that you outlined, Stella, over the last few decades. A colleague of mine, a work colleague, who was a chemist like me, but he was actually also a musician. He was a very good pianist. He had a book, and if you wanted to know, you had a piece of melody in your head, and you wanted to know what it was. You know, I've heard that somewhere. Where did it come from? This book, you took the first 5 notes of your melody, transposed it into the key of C, and wrote down the letters of those notes. And then this book had an index. You could look up alphabetically those 5 notes and find it took you to the pieces that began with that sequence, so you could find what you were looking for. Now you can whistle or something at your mobile phone, and Google tells you what the tune is. I think that's the same, the enormous transformation that we've been through.
Amazing.
Any more questions for Stella? Yes, one over there. Where's Gary with the... Gary, the microphone. Want it down here, please. Sorry.
Yes, fantastic discussion. So one aspect I was missing both in the definitions and in the discussion, and that is, in my world, things might as well not exist if they're not digital. So in a sense, being digital and interlinked is almost the basis of all our work nowadays with finding stuff or indexing stuff or reasoning about things. And that to me seems to be an important aspect.
My thoughts on that. I think you're so right. I mean, digital, for me, it's a synonym of sort of electronic or computerized in that whole area. Nowadays, you rely on a computer for almost everything you do. And it's a great boon, but I have to tell you that I do enjoy switching off from that. I've just come back from holiday, and I've been in the world in the Isle of Arran, where I'm coping with floods and with all these trees that have been chopped on my land when I wasn't there, and I've got to clear up the mess, and coping with the high tide that flooded the water, and loads of this sounds inconvenient, but somehow or other, in that world of just dealing with the elements, you feel refreshed, and you feel humans have got to be able to cope with the elements and not the world of the computerized world and the art and the world where you're in a city and someone else will do it for you. You've got to be kind of self-reliant. So I think that we have to welcome the coexistence of that, the old world out there, and still to be full human beings, we've got to be capable of chopping the blooming logs and clearing the drain and doing all the other stuff that I have to say I was very glad when I found some people to help me with.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions, we'll move on to the other item that I mentioned, which is the 2018 Strix Award. And it's my great pleasure to announce that the 2018 Strix Award goes to Professor Pia Borland. Now, Professor Borland is a professor at the Department of Archivistics, Library and Information Science at Oslo and Akershus University College of Applied Science in Norway. Just a few brief remarks about Professor Borland. Where's my... Sorry, got the wrong bit of paper. Within the information retrieval community, Professor Borland is known for her innovative contributions to IR in retrieval studies, user studies, evaluations and test designs, including strong, novel methodological contributions to interactive information retrieval and evaluation. In particular, she is recognized for her development of her IIR evaluation model, which uniquely employs simulated work task situations. She developed this evaluation model as a doctoral student by taking up the challenge of calls put forward by Stephen Robertson, first recipient of the Strix Award, and sorry, I've lost my place, and Hancock Bewley. Now, one cannot talk about information retrieval performance or user satisfaction with retrieved information without talking about relevance. Therefore, it should be noted that another significant contribution of Borland is her iconic paper on the concept of relevance. With this, the multiple year-long debates regarding the relevance concept ended, as she pragmatically demonstrated the different uses of the concept that had led to a general lack of agreement about what it meant. and a list of Borland's publications, including that reference, can be found on her Google Scholar page. Similar to the work, similar to the work by the memorable Tony Kent, the work by Professor Borland is original and innovative and has had a significant impact on information retrieval, research and applications. Her approaches are analytical and practical, and her devotion and dedication to users and to IIR are outstanding. Now, unfortunately, Professor Borland can't be with us at the moment to receive the award, but I'm happy to say that Andy McFarland, reader from City University, has agreed to accept the award on her behalf. Is David here? Yes. Oh, you're here. Oh, there you are. Okay. And I'll ask David Ball, Chairman of UK EIG, to present the award.
I'm very pleased to present this award to Pia in absentia, but still a great honour for her to be here.
I'm very, very pleased to accept this award on Pia's behalf. It's thoroughly deserved.
Right. That brings us more or less nicely on time to tea, which will be served, tea and coffee, which will be served in the library, which is immediately across the corridor over there. And I just remind you, please be back here, seated, ready to begin by 3:45. Thank you. Sorry?
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Good heavens. Good heavens. Well. I wouldn't have recognised you, and...
Is that a good or a bad thing?
I don't know. Well, you probably wouldn't have recognised me.
I have to admit, if it wasn't for the context,